You think royal food tasters spent all day sampling fancy palace meals just to take a poison bullet for the king? Dead wrong. Their real job had almost nothing to do with food. Every single morning, their first official task was to taste the king's poop. This isn't some weird internet meme or lost urban legend. This was a formal, high-ranking medical position recognized by every major ancient civilization on the planet. These men earned noble-level salaries, held official titles, and carried more court influence than most fully trained knights. Today we're answering every question you're dying to ask. How the hell do you taste test poop for medical diagnosis? Did it actually work? And why did every single ancient culture, with zero contact with each other, all invent this exact same insane job? Stick around, because by the end, you'll never look at ancient royalty the same way again. Let's start with the myth you already know. Pop culture tells you food tasters were disposable human shield servants, taking a bite of every dish so the king didn't drop dead from arsenic. And sure, that was a tiny side gig. But here's the cold truth no one tells you. Acute food poisoning of a monarch was incredibly rare. Most royal assassinations were done with knives, battlefield coups, or palace conspiracies, not slipping poison into the soup. And when poison was used, it was almost always slow, chronic poison, doled out in tiny doses over weeks or months. One single bite from a food taster would never catch that. So why did every royal court on Earth keep these positions fully staffed? Because they weren't food tasters first. They were royal physicians. And their number one, most reliable diagnostic tool? The king's daily bowel movement. And this wasn't some random dumb idea a king came up with on a hungover morning. This practice goes back 3,500 years and popped up independently on every inhabited continent. Our first written proof comes from ancient Egypt, right in the Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical textbooks on Earth. It has entire dedicated sections on diagnosing disease through fecal taste, texture, and color. The pharaoh's chief poop tester was a senior priest physician, answerable only to the pharaoh and his grand vizier. From Egypt, the practice spread to ancient Greece, where Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, turned it into formal medical doctrine. You've heard of the four humors, right? That ancient system that ruled all of Western medicine for 2,000 straight years? Well, Hippocrates explicitly stated that your poop was the clearest, most accurate window into your humor balance. Sweet taste meant excess blood, bitter meant yellow bile overload, sour meant phlegm dysfunction, and dark, foul taste meant dangerous black bile buildup. Then the Romans conquered Greece, and their most legendary doctor, Galen, personal physician to Emperor Marcus Aurelius, doubled down hard on the practice. He wrote entire step-by-step guides to fecal taste testing, with granular flavor profiles mapped to specific diseases. His medical textbooks were the global standard curriculum for 1,500 years, straight through the Middle Ages. It spread east too. Avicenna, the greatest physician of the Islamic Golden Age, included full chapters on fecal diagnosis in his Canon of Medicine, a book used as the core medical textbook from Spain to India for 700 years. Halfway across the world, the Maya and Aztec empires independently invented the exact same practice, with dedicated royal healer positions whose core job was daily fecal testing for the emperor. Let that sink in. For completely separate civilizations, on two different continents, zero contact with each other, all landed on taste poop to diagnose disease. That's not a coincidence. That means it worked. Well enough for every culture on Earth to figure it out on their own. Quick question for you right now. If you had to taste a stranger's poop every single day for a living, how much would they have to pay you? Drop your number in the comments. I bet it's way less than these guys actually made. Wait till you hear the salary numbers. First, let's break down how you even qualified for this job. This wasn't a punishment gig you handed to the worst servant in the castle. You had to be a fully trained top-tier physician. In medieval Europe, that meant 10+ years of university medical school, plus years of hands-on apprenticeship. You had to pass blind practical exams, test fecal samples from sick patients, and correctly diagnose their conditions. Only the absolute best of the best even got an interview for the royal position. So what did a typical workday look like? Let's use a medieval English king as our example. Every morning, immediately after the king used his chamber pot, a dedicated, trusted servant would seal the vessel and carry it straight to the royal physician's private palace chambers. No stops, no detours, no one else allowed to touch it. The physician would then run through a strict, standardized 4-step test, no shortcuts. First, visual inspection, color, consistency, shape, undigested residue. Light brown, dark brown, black, red, yellow, green. Each shade mapped to a specific organ issue. Solid, soft, watery, greasy, lumpy. Each texture told a different story about digestive and metabolic health. They'd even sift through to check for undigested food particles to gauge how well the king's stomach was processing his meals. Second, smell test. Sour, bitter, rancid, faintly sweet. Each scent tied to a different humor imbalance and disease category. Third, the taste test. Just a tiny, controlled sample, obviously, but enough to pick up on subtle flavor notes. Sweet meant blood/liver congestion, bitter meant gallbladder dysfunction, sour meant stomach or intestinal infection, metallic meant kidney or spleen disease. It was an entire diagnostic code, refined and updated over thousands of years of practice. After the full exam, the physician would write up a daily health report. Current status, any imbalances detected, and specific recommendations for diet, herbal remedies, or treatment for the day. Sounds insane, right? Wait till you hear the big twist. This wasn't a gross, dead-end, low-status job. It was the most prestigious, highest-paying medical career you could possibly get in the ancient world. And that's the massive midpoint reveal we're diving into right now. All right, let's drop the 3 hard truths that completely flip everything you think you know about this job. Truth number 1. These men were not servants. They were high-ranking nobles with official titles, private estates, and real political power. Let's run the numbers, because this is where it gets truly wild. In medieval England, a regular village doctor made £2 to £3 a year. A fully trained knight, with his own retinue of soldiers and landed estate, about £20 a year. The king's chief physician, £100 a year, plus free luxury housing in the royal palace, free food for him and his entire staff, and endless performance bonuses. That's 50 times more than a village doctor, 5 times more than a knight. In today's money, that's easily a mid-7-figure annual salary, all for tasting the king's poop every morning. In ancient Rome, the emperor's chief physician earned the exact same salary as a provincial governor. He was gifted a massive country villa outside Rome, a staff of dozens of servants and junior doctors, and a reserved seat at imperial council meetings whenever health or public medical policy was on the agenda. This wasn't a punishment. This was the dream job. Noble-born medical students would scheme, network, and lobby for years just to get a foot in the door for the position. It was the absolute pinnacle of a medical career. Truth number 2. This wasn't random guesswork. It was shockingly accurate. Way more reliable than almost any other ancient medical treatment. Let's be completely honest here. Most ancient medicine was straight-up garbage. Bloodletting killed more people than it helped. Trepanning, drilling holes in people's skulls to release evil spirits, almost always a death sentence. Most herbal remedies did absolutely nothing, and some were straight-up poison. But fecal taste testing? A huge amount of their core observations were 100% correct. They knew pale, greasy, foul-smelling poop meant liver disease. They knew dark, tarry poop meant internal bleeding in the stomach, or upper intestines. They knew sweet tasting waste meant diabetes. They could reliably tell the difference between a mild stomach bug and a life-threatening kidney infection just from the taste and texture of a sample. Were they wrong sometimes? Absolutely. They didn't know about bacteria or viruses. They blamed every issue on humor imbalance, which was a completely wrong framework. But for the technology and knowledge they had, their diagnostic hit rate was way higher than any other method of the era. Truth number 3. The kings themselves were obsessed with this. It wasn't some scam doctors ran to grift easy money. Most monarchs demanded daily fecal testing, no exceptions, no days off. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor of Rome, he insisted on a full fecal exam every single morning. Even when he was out on brutal military campaigns, fighting Germanic tribes on the empire's frozen northern border. He packed his full medical team with him on every march, because he believed daily poop tests were the only way to stay healthy enough to run an empire and win a war. Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, he had his doctors test his feces 3 times a day. First thing in the morning, after lunch, and right before bed. He made all his children and top nobles get regular testing too, because he was convinced it was the secret to a long, healthy life. These were the most powerful men in the world. They didn't have to do this. They fully believed it worked. And honestly, given the other horrific medical options they had, they were probably right. So let me ask you again now that you know the pay and the status. 7 figures a year, a noble title, free palace housing. All you have to do is taste the king's poop every morning. You in? Yes or no in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. But enough about the job itself. Did it actually save lives? Let's get into the real, documented historical cases where poop tasting directly kept kings and rulers alive. First stop, ancient Egypt, 1300 BCE, the reign of Ramesses the Great. Ramesses was one of the most powerful pharaohs who ever lived, and he ruled for a record 66 years. But early in his reign, his chief physician Pentaweret noticed something off during a routine daily test. The pharaoh's feces were unusually sweet and consistently softer than normal. Pentaweret diagnosed a blood-humor imbalance linked to early kidney dysfunction. He immediately cut all rich, sugary foods and heavy meats from Ramesses' diet and prescribed herbal diuretics to support kidney function. It worked. The symptoms cleared up within months, and Ramesses went on to live to 90 years old, an almost unheard-of lifespan for the Bronze Age. Modern doctors who've studied the case think he probably had early-stage type 2 diabetes or a mild chronic kidney infection. Either way, Pentaweret caught it early with a taste test and saved his life. Second case, Hippocrates himself in ancient Athens. A wealthy, powerful Athenian statesman came to him complaining of constant fatigue, chronic stomach pain, and weight loss. Every other doctor in the city had told him it was just indigestion from too much wine and rich food, and prescribed more rest and more wine. Hippocrates ran a full fecal exam, including taste, and picked up on a bitter, metallic flavor paired with an unusually dark color. He diagnosed a serious, progressive liver disorder. Not just indigestion, he put the man on a strict, light plant-based diet, cut all alcohol entirely, and prescribed regular exercise and targeted herbal treatments. Within a few months, the man was fully recovered. He lived another 20 years, and always credited Hippocrates and his fecal diagnostic method with saving him from a slow, painful death. Third case, Galen and Marcus Aurelius on the battlefield. During a brutal multi-year military campaign against Germanic tribes along the Danube, Marcus Aurelius fell violently ill. High fever, constant vomiting, crippling abdominal pain. The other army doctors assigned to the campaign said it was just a bad stomach bug from spoiled food, told him to rest and drink wine to balance his humors. Galen ran an emergency fecal test, and noticed small traces of blood and a strong, unusual bitter taste that didn't match a regular stomach bug. He realized this wasn't a mild illness. It was a severe bacterial intestinal infection that could kill the emperor if left untreated. He immediately ordered the emperor to stop drinking wine entirely, put him on a strict liquid diet of barley water and herbal infusions, and gave him targeted herbal antibiotic remedies. The other doctors mocked him openly for going against standard treatment and wasting the emperor's time. But Marcus Aurelius trusted Galen, so he followed the orders exactly. Within a week, the fever broke. A few weeks later, he was fully back to normal and returned to leading the army. If they'd listened to the other doctors, he almost certainly would have died out on that frozen battlefield, and the entire Roman Empire would have collapsed into civil war. And the fourth case? Poison detection. Remember how I said slow? Chronic poison doesn't show up with a single bite of food tasting. It does show up in feces, clear as day. In 1200s England, during the reign of King John, the king's chief physician noticed a strange, persistent metallic taste developing in the king's feces over the course of a few weeks, paired with an unusual dark color and worsening digestive symptoms. He knew immediately that wasn't a natural disease. That was chronic arsenic poisoning. He ordered an immediate, secret investigation of the entire kitchen staff. Sure enough, one of the head cooks had been bribed by a group of rebellious barons to slowly add arsenic to the king's food, aiming to kill him quietly and blame it on natural illness. They arrested the cook before the poison reached a fatal dose, stopped the plot entirely, and the king made a full recovery. If they hadn't been testing his poop every single day, they never would have caught the poisoning until it was far too late. So that leaves one huge, lingering question. Why? Why did every single ancient civilization on Earth, with zero contact with each other, all independently invent this exact same practice? Why poop of all things? There are four simple, logical, completely understandable reasons. First, they had no better options. Think about it for 2 seconds. If you're a doctor 3,000 years ago, how do you diagnose internal disease? No X-rays, no blood tests, no microscopes, no CT scans, no lab work of any kind. All you have is your 5 senses. The outside of the body doesn't tell you much. Someone can look completely fine and be dying of organ failure on the inside. But bodily waste? It's a free, daily, readily available sample of what's going on inside your digestive system. Your liver, your kidneys, your metabolism. It's the most accessible window into internal health that exists. What else were they supposed to do? It wasn't stupid. It was the best diagnostic tool they had, given the limits of their technology. Second, it was based on real, observable patterns. The four humors theory was completely wrong, yes, but the actual patterns and correlations ancient doctors noticed, a lot of them were 100% factually correct. They saw that liver disease changes the color and texture of poop. They saw that intestinal infections cause watery, sour-tasting waste. They saw that diabetes makes urine and feces taste sweet. They didn't know why it happened. They had no concept of insulin or bacteria or bilirubin. But they saw the consistent pattern, and they used it to treat people. That's not superstition. That's basic scientific method, working with extremely limited tools. Third, for royalty, it was a national security issue. Kings had 2 all-consuming fears: getting assassinated by poison, and dying young and throwing the entire kingdom into a brutal civil war. Daily fecal testing addressed both. It caught slow, chronic poison early, before it reached a fatal dose. It caught emerging health issues before they became life-threatening, when they were still easy to treat with diet and herbs. For an entire kingdom, paying a doctor a huge salary to taste the king's poop every morning was a tiny, trivial price to pay for political stability and a peaceful succession. It was never a vanity project. It was a national security expense. Fourth, it was backed by the biggest names in medical history. Once Hippocrates wrote about it and codified it, then Galen expanded it and made it the standard. Then Avicenna formalized it for the Islamic world. It became the undisputed global medical standard. For 2,000 straight years, every medical student on 3 continents learned that fecal taste testing was a core, non-negotiable part of diagnosis. If you were a doctor and you didn't taste your patient's feces to make a diagnosis, you were considered a hack, a fraud, and a quack. It was just how medicine was done. And for the record, poop tasting isn't even the grossest diagnostic method ancient doctors used. Let's run through the others real quick, just to put things in perspective. First, urine tasting. This was actually even more common than poop tasting, and every ancient doctor on Earth did it. That's exactly how diabetes was first discovered. Ancient physicians noticed some patients had urine that tasted distinctly like honey, and they were 100% correct. Second, sweat tasting. Doctors would wipe a patient's forehead or neck with a clean cloth after exercise, then taste the sweat on the fabric. Salty, sour, bitter, sweet. Each flavor profile meant a different humor imbalance. Third, pus tasting. If you had an infected wound, an abscess, or a boil, the doctor would taste the pus to gauge how severe the infection was. Sweet, mild-tasting pus meant a mild infection that would heal well. Bitter, foul. Rancid-tasting pus meant a severe, potentially fatal infection. Yeah, pus tasting. That makes poop tasting look like a pretty tame gig, honestly. And don't even get me started on the actual treatments. Bloodletting, trepanning, mercury ointments, lead-based medicines. All kinds of stuff that did way more harm than good. When you compare all that to fecal taste testing, it's actually one of the least crazy, most scientifically valid parts of all ancient medicine. It's non-invasive, it doesn't hurt the patient at all, and a huge portion of its core observations were factually correct. So if you had to pick one ancient medical test to undergo, which are you picking? Poop taste, urine taste, sweat taste, pus taste, bloodletting, or skull drill? Drop your pick in the comments. Mine's definitely poop taste. No contest. So if this method worked so well and was so universal, why did we stop? When did doctors quit tasting poop as a standard diagnostic tool? It started to die out slowly during the Renaissance, as modern scientific method took off. First, human dissections became more common and more accepted, and doctors learned far more about how the human body actually works internally. They started to realize the 4 humors theory didn't match up with actual anatomy and physiology. Then the microscope was invented in the 1600s, and suddenly we could see things no human eye had ever seen before. Bacteria, parasites, blood cells, microscopic tissue structure. We started to learn that disease was caused by tiny organisms and tissue damage, not an imbalance of imaginary fluids. Then in the 1800s, germ theory was fully developed and proven, and modern medicine, as we know it, was officially born. As better, more accurate diagnostic tools were invented, the old taste test slowly fell out of favor. By the mid-1800s, mainstream doctors no longer tasted feces or urine as part of standard diagnosis. They still examined them visually and by smell, but the tasting step was gone. By the early 1900s, chemical lab tests had been developed that could analyze feces and urine samples way more accurately and way more precisely than any human tongue ever could. The royal poop taster job officially ceased to exist entirely. But here's the wild full circle part. The core idea never went away. It's actually more important now than it ever was in ancient times. Every single time you go to the doctor and they ask you for a stool sample, that's the direct, lineal descendant of the ancient royal poop taster. We still test feces for liver disease, kidney dysfunction, digestive disorders, intestinal infections, parasites, colon cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, and so much more. We test for blood bacteria, chemical markers, enzyme levels. All the same general categories ancient doctors looked for. We just use fancy lab equipment and chemical assays instead of our tongues. And now, with all the cutting-edge research into gut health and the gut microbiome, fecal testing is one of the hottest, fastest-growing areas of modern medical research. We now know that the bacteria in your gut affects everything from your digestion to your immune system to your mental health to your risk of chronic disease. And we study all of it through fecal samples. So that weird, gross, seemingly stupid ancient practice? It didn't die. It just got a high-tech upgrade. All right, let's wrap this up with the core takeaways, because there's a lot to unpack here. First, the royal food taster is one of the most misunderstood jobs in all of history. The food testing part was a tiny, minor side gig. Their real, core job was being a high-paid, high-ranking royal physician who tested the king's poop every single day to monitor his health. Second, this wasn't some weird niche joke. It was a global, official medical position, held by wealthy nobles, and it was the single most prestigious job a doctor could get in the ancient world. Third, it actually worked. A lot of their core observations were factually correct, and it saved countless royal lives from both disease and poisoning. For the technology and knowledge of the time, it was incredibly effective. And fourth, the core idea is still with us today. It evolved into modern stool testing, which is a critical, foundational part of modern medicine. I think the reason this story is so fascinating is that it shows how wrong our pop culture view of history really is. We write off ancient people as primitive, as stupid, as people who believed in crazy random stuff for no reason. But most of the time, their practices made perfect sense with the information and tools they had available. They weren't stupid. They just didn't have 2,000 more years of accumulated scientific research and fancy lab equipment. They used what they had, and they did the best they could. And honestly, it was pretty smart. Now, if you thought this job was wild, just wait for our next video. We're diving into another ancient royal job that's even more bizarre, way more disgusting, and way more secretive than poop tasting. It was a job so reviled, even poor peasants turned it down flat. But it paid so well you could retire filthy rich in 3 years. And almost no one today has ever heard of it. So hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications, because you do not want to miss that one. Trust me, before you go, drop a comment down below. What's the weirdest ancient job you've ever heard of? And would you take the royal poop taster gig for 7 figures a year? I read every single comment, and I love hearing your takes. If you learned something new today, smash that like button. It helps the channel a ton, and it helps more weird history fans find this video. And share it with any friend who loves crazy, mind-blowing history facts they definitely didn't teach you in school. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.